Hey, what's going on, guys? In this crash course, we're going to look at SSH, or Secure Shell, which is something that is extremely important to understand, at least know the basics in web development. And I know that when I went from using FTP to using Secure Shell in a terminal, it confused the hell out of me. And I like to make videos that I would have wanted to see back then, videos that could have helped me. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to go over a few things. We're going to first look at some slides and just talk about what SSH is, what it's used for, and so on. And then we're going to jump into logging into a local Ubuntu server with SSH. So a local server that's on my network. And we're going to create some SSH keys so that we don't have to use a password. We can use those keys. We'll generate a set of private and public keys. And then after that, we're going to move to a remote DigitalOcean server, or Droplet as they call them. And DigitalOcean is a great hosting service to host any kind of application, and they basically give you these little servers and you can SSH into them and install what you want, Node.js or a LAMP stack, whatever type of app you want. So we'll do that. And then I'm also going to show you how to set up SSH keys with GitHub so that you can clone repositories and stuff like that without having to use your password, your username and password. And you guys have probably done this before, but just for the people that haven't. So hopefully you guys like this. I've been asked to do more DevOps stuff, and I think this is a good place to start. So let's get into it. All right, so we're going to briefly talk about what SSH is. We're not going to get into like specific encryption methods and real advanced stuff. This is to learn the basics and the fundamentals and how to use it. So it stands for Secure Shell, and it's a protocol to communicate with other computers, similar to HTTP, HTTPS, FTP. These are all different types of protocols that communicate in different ways for different reasons. So with SSH, we can use it for pretty much anything as far as creating files on other computers, folders and files, installing programs, running programs, deploying applications for the web and setting up web servers, pretty much anything you want. And what's great about it is it's secure, it's encrypted, okay? All the traffic is going to be encrypted. There are other protocols that are similar, like Telnet, where you can log in and you can do this stuff, but it's not safe because it's not encrypted. People can basically hijack your sessions and things like that. So SSH is definitely what you want to use for this type of stuff. Now, SSH is usually used in a remote command line or terminal session, but it can also be used with SCP, or secure file copy. And there's actually GUI programs where you can basically drag and drop files to your server that way. And WinSCP for Windows is one of them that I can think of, one of the clients that I can think of. And then you can also use it with FTP. There's something called Secure FTP, where you can use something like FileZilla, which is an FTP client. You can set it up to use SSH and SFTP and transfer your files in a more secure way. So we'll be just sticking to the terminal for this video. Now, you can't just log into any machine on Earth with SSH, even if you have the credentials. The server or the machine that you're logging into has to have something called SSHD, or Open SSH Daemon, which sits and listens for SSH connections. Okay, so usually it's a Linux server you're logging into, and with something like, let's say, Ubuntu server, which is the operating system that my local server is running, that comes with SSHD. So it's not something that I had to set up, it's just automatically installed. I think with the desktop version of Ubuntu, you have to install it using your package manager. I'm not positive about that, but I think that's the case. And then on the server, you also have an SSHD config file where you can change things like, let's say, if you want to disable password login for the root user to prevent brute force attacks, and just make other security provisions on your server, you would use that file to do that. So obviously you need a way to authenticate with your server, authenticate using SSH, and there's a few ways to do that. You can use the password, which is basically the default way of doing it, where you have a user on that remote server, and then you have the password for that user. And then to log in, what you would do is just use the SSH command. you would put the name of the user you want to log in as, and then and then the host name or the IP address like this. So this is actually the local IP address of my Ubuntu server. So this is how I would log in. And then once I did that, if I didn't have SSH keys set up, which I'll talk about in a second, it's going to prompt me for the password. And then I put the password in, it'll show me a welcome screen in the terminal, and then I can go to town and create applications or whatever I want to do on that server. Now, another way that you can authenticate is by using SSH keys, and you can bypass the password altogether. You just simply type this in and it'll let you right in. And the way that you do this is by generating a set of public and private keys on your machine, and I'm going to tell you how to do that in a second. But that's the recommended way of doing things. It's safer than using passwords. People can brute force attack passwords and things like that. And then you also have host-based authentication, where it goes by the host. So you have a file called known hosts, which store any host that's allowed to connect to that machine. But we're not going to get into that. We're going to stick to the password and SSH keys. All right, so to generate these keys, it's pretty simple. All you have to do is run this SSH keygen command, and basically what it's going to do is it's going to create a public key and a private key. It's going to create it by default right in your home folder or your user folder, which is this tilde, that's what that represents. And then it's going to be in a folder called .ssh. Okay, now the dot means that it's going to be a hidden folder by default. So if you're in like Windows Explorer or on your Mac in the Finder or whatever, unless you have hidden files enabled, you won't see this. And then inside there, it's going to create a file called ID_RSA. Okay, that's the default name for your SSH key. And it will prompt you when you run this command here. It will prompt you to see if you want to call it something different, but this is the default. And then your public key is going to be in the same location. It's going to be the same name, except it's going to have .pub after it. Okay, so the .pub just tells you that this is the public key, and this is what you actually want to put on your server. Okay, now on your server, you'll also have a .ssh folder, or you'll create one if it doesn't have one yet, and then you'll have a folder in there called authorized keys, and that's where your public key goes. Okay, so that's how the server knows if the machine that you're logging in with actually is authorized to do so. Okay, and I'm going to show you how to do all this, so don't worry if this is confusing you. So what about Windows? SSH, the command itself, is a Unix-based command. It's always been available on Unix on Linux and Mac because they're Unix-based systems. However, Windows didn't support native SSH until very recently. So on older versions of Windows, we would use something called PuTTY and PuTTYgen. PuTTYgen was used to create the keys, and then PuTTY was used to actually connect to the server. And it's a GUI program. It is a graphical program, but it's a pain in the ass to use. I hated it when I used to use Windows, like before SSH was available, before Git Bash was available and stuff like that. But if you are on, let's say, Windows 7 or Windows 8 or something like that, I don't believe the SSH command is available on those systems. So you will have to use something like PuTTY, but I would recommend using Git Bash, which is just an awesome terminal program. And I'm pretty sure you can use it on Windows 7 and 8. It's just been so long since I've used those operating systems. But that should give you the SSH command. And then anything I do in this video on my Mac, you should be able to do on Windows as well. All right, so we're going to get started. Like I said, we're going to start with a local server that's on my network, and then we're going to move to a remote DigitalOcean droplet. I'll show you how to create SSH keys, how to do a little bit of provisioning on the server, how to create SSH keys for GitHub and add those to your GitHub account, and maybe a couple other things as well. So let's go ahead and get started with that. All right, guys, so we're going to get started now. I'm going to be typing in a ton of commands, so I'm going to put a gist file in the description so that you guys have all the commands as a reference. So if you're following along, or if you just want it as a reference for future projects or whatever. So what we're going to do, like I said, we're going to start with the local server. I have an Ubuntu server on my network. It's a virtual machine, but it has its own IP address. So as far as the network knows, it doesn't matter if it's a physical machine or a virtual machine. machine. So we're going to start with that, and then we're going to move to a remote DigitalOcean droplet, and we're going to work with that. We're also going to work with GitHub. We're going to add our SSH keys for our server to GitHub so that we can do clones, and we can work with GitHub on our server. So basically what we're going to start off with is just logging in with SSH to our local server. So to do that, we use the SSH command, and we want to put in the name that we want to log in as. So this name is what I used when I created the Ubuntu server. And then we want the IP address or host name. In this case, the IP address is 192.168.129. All right, so once I do that, we're going to get this message, and you're only going to see this the first time you try to SSH into a server. And if we say yes, it's just going to add us to the known host file. Now it's going to ask us for a password to authenticate, so this would be the password for Brad on this system, on the server. Okay, not the machine I'm on, not my local machine. Okay, so now you can see we get greeted with this little welcome page, and it just tells us like the server version, so 18.04. It gives us like some system information, memory usage, shows us the IP address, and then down here notice that it says Brad at Dev Web Server. So that's actually the name of my local server, and that means that we're now inside of that server. We're no longer on my local Mac. Okay, so I'm going to just clear this up, and if I do an ls, you see there's nothing here. We're in the home directory, my home directory on the server. Now, if we wanted to go to the root, we could cd to /, and if I do an ls, you'll see all the root Linux files are in folders, so etc, bin, dev, all these folders. And we can do whatever we want. As long as the user on the server has the permissions, we can do whatever we would like as if we were right in front of the machine. I have a Linux server that I ran for years that has all my media, all my music and movies and stuff, and it never had a monitor. It was headless, so I'd only use SSH to manage it, to log in and manage it, in addition to some browser-based tools like Plex for media streaming and stuff like that. So let's go ahead and cd, and that'll bring us back to our home directory. And then we can obviously create folders. So if I make a directory called test, and you can see that was created, we can cd into test. We can create files, so touch test.txt. That will create a test.txt file. All right, so we can do anything as if we were logged in. And I'm just going to cd back to the home directory, and I'm going to remove that test folder. So we're going to do remove, and then since it has something in it, we're going to do -rf and then test. And if we do an ls, now that file and folder is gone. Okay, I do have if you're interested, I have a command line tutorial on my channel I did probably about 1.5 years ago that I think is pretty good and gives you all the basic commands to move things around and copy files and all that stuff. So let's go ahead and install something. I want to install an Apache server. So I'm going to open up Chrome. So let's see. And I'm going to go to that IP address, my local IP address. And notice that nothing happens. That's because this server doesn't have any web server installed on it. So I'm going to install Apache. So let's go ahead and do sudo, because we need to run this as root, just like on your Mac. And then we want to do apt install. Okay, so apt is our package manager, and we're saying we want to install using our package manager Apache 2. Oops, I spell that right. Apache. It's hard to talk and type at the same time. And then I'm going to do -y to answer yes to any questions. Just put in our password there, and then it's going to go ahead and install Apache on the local server. And I mean, you could set up a whole LAMP stack. You could, create mean stack applications, whatever you want to do. Python, Django, you can do anything. So now that Apache's installed, if I go back to my browser and I reload this page, we're going to see the Apache start page. Okay, so once you install Apache, this will automatically be put into your var/www/html folder, which is your web root. Okay, so just to show you that we can install stuff, and we could access this IP address from anywhere on my local network. If I go down to my living room, as long as it's on the same network, I can go ahead and I can access this, and we could create web applications locally if we wanted to. And of course, use it for other things. Like I said, I have a Linux media server, so you can do whatever you want with a server like this. So what I want to do now is create some SSH keys, because right now, I mean, we can exit. If we type exit, that takes us back out. You can see now it says Brad's iMac Pro. So we're not in the server anymore. But if I were to try to log back in, I'll have to put in a password. So what I want to do is generate SSH keys. So to do that, we use SSH-keygen. Okay, so if I go ahead and I run this, it's going to ask us where we want to save the key and what file we want to save it as. So the default is going to be in your whatever your home directory for your user, your logged in user, and then .ssh, which is going to be a hidden folder by default, and then the file name will be id_rsa. Okay, so that's going to be the name of the private and public key. The public key will just have .pub after it. So I'm going to keep the default and just hit enter. And you can also attach a passphrase if you want. I'm not going to, so I'm just going to hit enter twice. And then that should create our key. So if we were to, let's do an ls into .ssh, ls.ssh, you can see that we have the private key here and the public key. And if we want to take a look at what the public key looks like, we can use the cat command, which will just basically display the contents of the file. So we'll say cat .ssh, because that's the folder it's in, and then id_rsa.pub. And there it is. So that's what our key looks like, our public key. The private key is a little longer. The private key you don't do anything with. You just keep it on your system. So now that we have this key on our local system, what we need to do is get this public key onto the server. So like I said in the slides, where this needs to go is into .ssh folder on the server, and then in a file called authorized keys. So I'm actually going to go to a DigitalOcean documentation page real quick. So if you search for create SSH keys, and I'll put this link in the description as well. It's the second one right here. So it shows you how to generate a key. They want you to use the T flag and RSA, but that's fine. And it generates the key, and then to copy it to the server, you could use something called SSH copy ID, but you have to install that with Homebrew. So I don't want to do that because some of you might not be on a Mac, and some of you might not have Homebrew installed, and I don't want to go through that. So right here it says alternatively you can use this. So basically this is one long command that, or a couple commands, that is going to first take the content of the public key file. It's going to SSH into your server. It's going to create a .ssh folder on your server, change the permissions, and then it's going to put whatever is in that public key file inside of a file called authorized keys. So this one line is going to do all that stuff for us, and this will be in the gist in the description. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy this, and then we'll go back to our terminal and let's clear it out. And let's paste that in, except we need to just edit. Whoops, what happened here? I might have to paste it in to a file first. Yeah, I'm going to have to paste it into a file first because this is giving me problems. All right, so let me just open up Sublime Text real quick. Let's see, file, new file. All right, so I'll paste it in here. Oops. And then I'm going to change this right here, this demo at this address, to mine, which is Brad at 192.168.29. Or is it .1.29? Okay, so let's copy this, and then hopefully that works. And let's enter. And it's going to ask us for the server password. and we should be all set. Okay, so it should be in the authorized keys folder on the server. So I'm going to close this up. We don't need this. So now we should be able to log in without a password. So if I go and I do SSH Brad at 192.168.1.29, there we go. No password needed. We now have our keys set up. So if I clear this up and we go to, let's say cat, because I want to display the contents of .ssh. I remember we're on our server now, and I want to look at the authorized _keys file. And there's our key. Okay, and just to double check, if I open up another window, another terminal on my local machine, and I take a look at our public key, which is in .ssh/id_rsa.pub, there it is, and you can see that it's the same exact key. Okay, so that's how we can add keys, and then we no longer need a password. All right, so let's see. We're going to do most of the stuff on the remote server, because that's more of a situation you'll probably have where you're deploying applications. This is more of a local type thing, but you can do anything you want here. So I just want to show you one more thing. If we wanted to, let's say, copy a file from our local machine to our server, to our dev web server, I'm going to exit out of here. So I'm back in my iMac, and what I'm going to do is just use actually, let's create a file. Let's see what we have here. I already created this move.txt file, but if you want to create a file, you could say touch. I'll just use test.txt. So now we have this file test.txt, and if I want to move it, I can actually use secure file copy. So I can do that with the scp command, and I can say I want to move it from the home directory, and then it's test.txt, and I want to move it to my server, which is going to be Brad at 192.168.1.29. And then I just want to put a colon, and then where I want to put it, which is going to be in the home folder on the server. Okay, so let's go ahead and run that. All right, and then if we log back into the server, I'm just going to go like that, and we do an ls, you'll see there it is. There's our test.txt file. So we move that file from our local machine to our server very quickly, and you can easily do that with folders and files, and there's a lot of different ways to do it. You can use rsync, and there's all kinds of commands that you can use. So now what I want to do is exit out of this, and let's clear this up. And now we're going to start to work with a remote DigitalOcean droplet. So if I go to my DigitalOcean panel, now let me explain a little bit about DigitalOcean. It's a hosting service. They offer droplets, which are basically just little servers. They're virtual servers, just like I just showed you, except it's remote. It's online, and you can deploy applications to it. And you can choose to use Linux Ubuntu. You can use there's other distributions you can use as well. And basically, when you sign up, you'll go to DigitalOcean.com, sign up, you'll add your credit card information, and they're not going to charge you anything when you sign up. Once you sign up, you just go to Create Droplet, and you go down and you choose a package. Okay, so I'm actually going to give you a link in the description for $10. So you get free $10, and you can choose the first package here, which is $5 per month. So that link will give you 2 free months of hosting. And the $5 per month obviously isn't good for like a big production app, but for testing, for stuff like that, it's absolutely fine. And if you don't use up to a certain point, they don't even charge you the $5. You get like a 0.007 cents per hour. So they're actually really cheap for what they give you. And if you wanted to, you can go to one-click apps, and you can have like Django installed, LAMP stack, mean stack, Docker. You can use all this stuff, make it all pre-installed when you set up your server. But we're not going to do that. I just want a plain Ubuntu server. Okay, so I'm going to choose $5 a month. I'm going to just leave all this stuff. And what's cool about this is we can do our SSH keys like we just did through the terminal if we want, but we can also do it this way. So we can add a key here, and that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to go to my terminal, And I could use the same key. Okay, remember we created the ID underscore RSA public and private key. I could just take that public key and put it in here, but I like to keep keys separate for separate things. Okay, so what I'm going to do is generate a new key for DigitalOcean. So I'm going to do SSH dash keygen, and they want you to do this TRSA, and it's going to do the same thing. It's going to ask us what we want to call it. Now, if I just hit enter, it's going to ask if I want to overwrite the current one because I already have one called this. So I'm going to change it, and you want to put the whole path. So users slash whatever your user. Let's see, spell my name right, and let's do slash and then dot SSH. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this ID underscore RSA underscore DO for DigitalOcean. Okay, so it has a different name than the other one. So let's go ahead and run that. I'm not going to use a passphrase. And then if we were to list the contents of .ssh, you can see now we have the DigitalOcean public and private key, as well as the other ones. So now what we want to do is we want to take that public key and we want to put it into DigitalOcean. So I'm going to do a cat .ssh. There's other utilities you can use like pbcopy and xclip if you want, but those aren't available on Windows, so I'm just trying to make this cross-platform. So we're just going to do cat, and then let's make sure we get the DigitalOcean one, which is RSA underscore DO, and we want the public key, of course. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just grab that. Make sure you don't leave any spaces at the end or the beginning. Has to be exact. So I'm going to copy it. I'm going to go new SSH key, paste it in, and we'll just call this key 1. Doesn't matter what you call it. And we'll add it. Okay, so now down here, it's going to ask us to choose a host name. I'm just going to leave this crazy host name. That's fine. And we'll click create. Okay, so it's going to just go through and create our server for us, or a droplet as they call it. In this CodeLearner.net that you see, you can connect domains to droplets, and I had this one connected before, so that's why it's listed here. Any domains you have connected to your droplets will show up here. Okay, so our server is now set up, or our droplet, and it has this IP address. Okay, this is the IP address of the droplet, and if I click on it, we have all types of information. Since we just set it up, the CPU and stuff isn't going to show yet, but you can see we can launch a console in the browser, we can reset the root password, we can power it off, we can resize it. So if you have a production app and it's getting too big for, let's say, the memory you have or the disk size, you can upgrade that easily, and same with CPU, stuff like that. There's also backups, recovery. You can take snapshots. So it's a really great service. It's definitely one of my favorite hosting services. So now that we have this server, let's try to log in. Now remember, we have the SSH keys, so we should be able to log in without a password. So let's go ahead and clear this out, and let's do SSH. Now it's going to be the root user. Okay, so it's going to be root at, and then the IP address, which is this. So I'm going to copy this and paste that in, and let's see what happens. So we get this message. We want to say yes, and then we're going to get this permission denied public key. Okay, so you may or may not get this. The reason we're getting this is because we used a new key called ID RSA DO. So what we need to do now is just run SSH -add, and then we want the location of the key and then the name of the key. So we want to do home/.ssh/ID underscore RSA underscore DO. Now we don't want to do the .pub here. When we do the SSH add, you're just adding the key like this. So let's run that, and it says identity added. Okay, so now we're going to go and we're going to try again to SSH into our server. And now it works. Okay, so we get this little message just like we did on the local server. It is using 16.04, not the latest. But you can see right here, we're logged in as root at Ubuntu, whatever, a bunch of gibberish. So we're now on our DigitalOcean server. It's that easy. So I'm going to clear this up. If I do an ls, there's nothing here. We can go to the root, and you can see all the root folders. Okay, let's go back to the home. Whoops, I want to just clear this up. All right, so we're logged into our server. Now, let's see, what do we want to do next? We don't want to, well, actually, first thing I would do when I get a server is I would update my packages. So I do sudo apt update, and that's just going to take all the packages that are installed and make them to the latest version. And then we can run sudo apt upgrade to actually upgrade the software. I mean, I didn't have to do this for the tutorial, but it's something that you should do once you create your server, just so everything's up to date. So then you would do sudo apt upgrade. Should have did yes, the yes flag. All right, so that'll upgrade everything. And then what I want to do next is I want to create a new user, because you should never use the root user. So we're going to create a new user and give it sudo privileges so that the user can run programs as root. And a lot of DigitalOcean tutorials don't actually do that. They don't tell you that or show you that. So we'll try to do things right. I also want to disable the root login, so you can't possibly even try to log in with a password with the root user. Okay, so if you get this is just asking about the grub menu. Just keep the local version installed. Just hit enter twice. Okay, so now that everything is updated, what we're going to do is, like I said, add a new user. So we can say add user, and I'm just going to call this user Brad. Okay, so it creates a new user Brad, a new group Brad, and if I do ID, oh shit, I'm supposed to put a password in. Whoops, I already typed something. Let's try again. Yes. All right, so I'm going to put a password in. All right, it's going to ask some questions. All I do is put my name in and then enter through everything else. All right, so now if we do ID Brad, it'll show us that there's a user and group named Brad, but we don't have sudo privileges yet. So what we want to do is, let's do user mod, and I'll have all this stuff in the description, so don't worry about that. And you want to add lowercase a and uppercase G. You want to add these flags, and then sudo, and then the username that you want to add the privileges for, which is Brad. Okay, once we do that, if I do ID Brad again, you'll see this sudo right here. Okay, so that's what we want. So now what I want to do is log in as Brad. So I'm going to exit out of my DigitalOcean server, and let's clear this up, and let's try to SSH in SSH with Brad at, and then whatever the IP is. Let me grab that. So what's going on here is we're getting a permission denied for our public key, because when we added our public key to the server, we added it for the root user. Every user you have, if you want to use SSH, you have to add the key to their specific SSH folder. So what we need to do is log back in as root. Okay, so we're going to log in as root, which our keys are all set. And then we're going to cd, I'm just going to cd into /home/Brad. Okay, so now we're in Brad's home folder, and we want to now create a directory. So make directory .ssh, and then we need to have our own authorized keys file for Brad. So let's just cd into .ssh, and let's go ahead and touch, which creates a file, authorized _ keys. Spell that right? Okay. So now we should have an authorized keys file. And now, as you can probably guess, what we want to do is paste in our key. So let's go ahead and let's see, how do I want to do this? Let's open up another terminal. And let's get our key. So I'm going to do cat.ssh / and then I want to make sure I get the DigitalOcean key. So it's id_RSA_do.pub. Okay, we want the public key. We're going to grab that and we're going to copy it. And then we're going to go over here and we need to get this key into the authorized keys file. So what I'm going to do is sudo nano, which is a terminal-based editor, text editor, and then authorized keys. Okay, so now I'm just going to paste in my key. You can't see it all, but it is here. If I go over, you'll see it's all here. So I'm going to save this with Control X, say yes, enter, and now it should be in there. So if I do a cat authorized keys, now you can see that it's in there. So now I should be able to log in as Brad through SSH. So let's go ahead and exit. Okay, we'll exit the root user. I'll clear this up, and then we're going to SSH as Brad. Actually, I'll just hit the up, yeah, right here. So now let's try this. And it works. And you can see now we're logged in as Brad. All right, so it's simple as that. So just remember, your keys, your public key that's on your system, on your local system, just needs to be in the server's authorized keys file, and then you're all set. So what I want to do now is I actually want to disable the root password login. So remember I told you there's an SSHD config file. So I'm going to do sudo nano SSHD, not SSHD, it's in the Etsy folder. So we want to go /etc /SSH/SSHD_config, and let's put in our password. Okay, so this is the config file. There's a lot of stuff you can change in here. By the way, port 22 is the default for SSH. In case you were wondering, 21 is FTP, 22 is SSH. And I just want to go down to, let's see, I want to look for root login. Right here, permit root login. So right now you can attempt to log in as a root user with a password, but I'm going to set that to no because that prevents brute force attacks and stuff like that. And there's a lot of other stuff as well I'm not going to get into. And then I'm going to make sure that password authentication is set to no, which it is already. So yeah, so let's save this. Command Control X and yes. And now nobody can log in with a password with root. You have to use the SSH key. Okay, and then we should just reload the SSHD service. So we can do that with sudo systemctl reload SSHD, and that will reload it. And I don't expect you to remember all these commands. Like I said, I'll have a reference sheet in the description. So now, let's see, what do we want to do next? Let's actually install Apache just like we did on the local server. So we can do sudo apt install Apache 2-y. And then once that's installed, we should be able to go to our IP address, which I'll grab right here in the browser and paste that in. And there we go. We have an Apache start page. So this is live now. This is no longer a local server that's on my network. This is live, and we could go through DigitalOcean and add a domain to this so that you could go to whatever something.com and you could have your application. So you could create a LAMP stack, install Node, whatever you want. I'm actually going to show you how to install Node and also deploy a React application. So, I mean, what we do from here on out is just kind of extra. I've already basically went over the basics of SSH. So, creating the keys and uploading to the server, stuff like that. But what I want to do now is I want to be able to use GitHub on the server. So I want to be able to clone a repository and stuff like that. So we have to create keys for GitHub, because if I try it now, and we have Git installed, it should be. So if we say Git version, you can see it is installed. But if I try to clone a repository, like let's say, let's go to my GitHub, and I'm going to grab this React Auth auth. So this is a React application. It doesn't have a backend. It uses Auth as the backend, so you don't actually need to have a Node API or anything like that. So you can build it to a static folder. But what I want to do is try to clone this onto my server. So I'm going to go to clone. I'm going to make sure it says clone with SSH, and then let's go ahead and let's copy this. And then let's go into our home folder and we'll say git clone, and we'll paste that in and run it. Okay, we'll get this, we say yes. And notice we get this same thing we've seen before, permission denied public key, because we don't have SSH keys set up with GitHub. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to do SSH -keygen -t RSA. And then, like I said before, I like to create separate keys for separate services. We have one for the local server. We have one for DigitalOcean. Now let's create one for GitHub. So I'm going to do, and remember, we're on our server now, so it's in home/Brad. That's the Linux structure, rather than users/ whatever. And then we want .ssh, and then / and let's call this ID _ and you'll have to do this on your local machine if you want to use GitHub with SSH on your local machine as well. So let's do ID _ RSA _ GitHub. Okay, so we have an issue here. We get failed permission denied. Now, the reason for this is because the .ssh folder it's under the root user and the root group. In fact, if I do let's do ls, we'll say ls -l, not ls, yes, ls, but we need the A as well because it's a hidden folder. There we go. All right, so let's take a look here. So everything has Brad. This is the user and the group. The .ssh has root as the user owner and the group. So what we want to do is change that to be Brad instead of root. So we can do that. And I know this is a lot of stuff going on here, a lot of commands, and it's overwhelming, but I do have the gist, and everything should be in order for you to check that out. So we're going to say sudo, and we're going to do chown, so change owner. So chown, and then we want to do recursive. We want this to basically change everything that's in the home Brad folder. So we want to change it to the user Brad and the group Brad, and the folder we're talking about is home/Brad. So everything in there we want to change to Brad. All right, so let's run that, and then we can do our ls-la again, and now notice the SSH folder has Brad as its owner and group. So now we should be able to go ahead and generate the key. So I'm going to go back to this right here, SSH keygen, and again, home brad.ssh /ID RSA _ GitHub. And now it works. Okay, so now if we were to ls.ssh, you can see we have our key, our public and private key for GitHub, in addition to our authorized keys file that's on our server. So now what we're going to do is take that public key and we want to put that onto GitHub. So let's do a cat.ssh /ID _ RSA _ GitHub.pub. Okay, so this is our key. We're going to grab this. So we want from here to here, and we'll copy that. And then in GitHub, I'm going to go to my settings. I'm going to go to SSH and GPG keys. I'm going to say new SSH key. You can call it what you want. I'm going to call it, actually I already have DO server 1, DigitalOcean server 1, that's what I'll call it, and I'll paste that in. Okay, make sure there's no like extra spaces here or anything. Got it. All right, so let's add that key. And now let's go back and let's clear this up. And then now let's try to clone that repository. So I'm just going to hit the up arrow till I get to my clone that I did, which is right here. And hopefully it works. So yes. And it didn't. Okay, now we did this happened to us before. Remember with DigitalOcean, we had to do the SSH add. So we're going to do that same thing. I'm going to say SSH-add, and we want to add /home/brad/id_rsa_github, like that. Could not open a connection to your authentication agent. All right, so if this happens, then we need to run eval. We got to do eval, and then we want to put in a set of backticks, and then we want SSH-agent, and then -s to activate the SSH agent, so it gives us the ID, and now we should be able to run our add. And there we go, identity added. Okay, so again, I'll put that in the gist. So now that we have our identity added, we should be able to do our clone finally. So let's clear this out and let's go to our clone and run it. And there we go. So now if we do ls, we have the React auth application inside, or repository inside of our home directory. All right, so what I want to do now is cd into that. So React auth, and if we do an ls, you'll see this is actually a React application, so we do need Node.js installed so that we can run npm install. It needs to look at the package.json and install the dependencies. So we don't have npm, we don't have Node installed. So to do that, let's go to, we don't need this page anymore, so let's just search for install node Ubuntu, because if you want the latest version, and if we go to Debian and Ubuntu based distributions, which is right here, if you want the latest version, you actually have to use the curl command, and you have to use this deb.nodesource, and then you want to put the version you want here. I want version 10, which is the latest. So I'm going to copy this and then go into my terminal and paste it in and just change the 8 to a 10, because I don't want version 8. I want version 10.x, whatever the latest version of 10 is. So we'll run that. And what that does is it adds it to the repo list, and now we should be able to install it by saying, right here, it'll show us apt-get install Node.js. Okay, so we'll say sudo. You don't have to do get anymore. You can just do apt install Node.js-y, and now this will install Node and npm. All right, so if we say node version, there it is, 10.6.0. All right, so now we're in the React folder, so let's do npm install, which will install all of our dependencies. And like I said, the stuff we're doing now isn't, I mean, the SSH tutorial is basically over. This is just stuff to show you some more, some more DevOps stuff. Because this stuff gets confusing. To me, DevOps it can get more complicated than web development and coding. Okay, so we have all of our dependencies installed. Now we can run the dev server if we do npm start. It was built with Create React App. I do have a video where we created this application. Okay, so it'll start the development server. Okay, and now we can go to our IP address and then go to port 3000. And there it is. There's our Acme staff portal. And like I said, this uses a service called Autka, where you can log in. You can it's basically a user management system. And I do have a video, like I said, creating this application. Now, you don't want to run this like this. Since this is a React app, what you would want to do is build out your static assets and then upload that and then serve that instead of this port 3000. This is the dev server. I just wanted to show you that you can do that. So let's go ahead and actually deploy it. So what I'm going to do is get out of this. So Control C, and let's move this. Remember, we have Apache installed. So with Apache, we have a file in var/www/html. If we look in there, that's the index HTML. That's the welcome page, the Apache welcome page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this index HTML file from here. So I'm going to say rm, which is the remove command, and then we want var www/html/index.html. We want to completely get rid of that. Remove, yes, and let's just make sure it's gone, which it is not, and that's because I forgot sudo. All right, let's make sure it's gone. Okay, so now that var www HTML folder is completely empty, what I want to do is I want to build out our React application. So we can do npm run build. And what that's going to do is it's going to take our application and it's going to create a production build. So it's going to build out all the static assets that we need, and it's going to include an index.html file that will be, connect to the compiled JavaScript, and it will be our application, and we can just upload it anywhere, including our Apache server. Okay, so once this is done building, what we'll do is we'll just move the contents of it to the var www HTML folder, and we should be able to access our application just by going to our IP address. All right, so now that that's built, if we do an ls, you'll see there's a folder called build. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say sudo, and I'm going to use the move command, mv, and I'm going to use the v flag, and then just do /home/brad, oops, should be slash, so home/brad/ and then react autka/auth, and then we want /builds because we want whatever is in the build folder. So let's do /star, which means everything in there, and we want to move it to var www/html. Okay, let me just double check that, make sure I didn't make any mistakes. So it'll take everything in the build folder, put it into our web root basically. So let's run that. All right, and now if we do an ls of the web root, you can see what's in there. Index.html, and then we have a folder called static, which has all of our static assets for React. So let's go now to just our IP address, no port 3000, no dev server, and run it, and there it is. There's our application. So if you wanted to add a domain, which you probably would if this was going to be production, you would go to networking and then add a domain. Now, of course, you have to register your domain somewhere, and then what you do is you point your name servers, your DNS. I'll just show you for an example for my codelearner.net. You want to point your name servers to ns1, ns2, ns3, digitalocean.com, and then just add an A record. You can put in just an @ symbol here, and then choose the droplet you want and add that record. Okay, and you can do that, and you can then have a domain. So I think that's all I want to do, guys. This went longer than I thought. I just wanted to throw in a couple extra things, some extra DevOps stuff, just to kind of get you familiar with how things work. But yeah, you can use DigitalOcean Droplet to build anything. If you're building a Django app or a Node.js app, React, Angular, full stack, whatever. You can do whatever you want, PHP, LAMP stack. So hopefully this tutorial helped you in terms of SSH. So you learned how to log in, how to create keys, how to deal with like adding keys and stuff like that, permissions and a bunch of other stuff. So and setting up GitHub, which is very important. And again, if you want GitHub keys set up for your local machine, you'd have to add that as well. So you don't have to add a password or anything, or use HTTPS. So that's going to be it, guys. Thank you for watching. Thank you for sticking with me through the whole thing, and I will see you in the next video.